I'm Asano and deep. When my daughter-in-law told me to leave that day, I smiled instead of crying. It wasn't the kind of smile you give when you're happy. It was the kind that hides the pain sitting in your chest. The kind that says, I expected this, but it still hurts. Before I begin, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been hurt by someone you loved like your own child? Someone you welcomed into your home, fed from your own hands, and prayed for every single night, only to one day realize they see you as a burden? If you've ever felt something like that, then please stay with me till the end, and maybe share your story in the comments below, because pain feels lighter when we talk about it. That day is still fresh in my memory. The sunlight was spilling through the window, soft and golden, touching the kitchen tiles. I was making tea, 2 cups, just the way my son liked it. He always said, "Mom, no one makes tea like you." Those words used to make my heart warm, but lately, he didn't say them anymore. He didn't even drink tea with me unless his wife wasn't home. I could tell things were changing. Small things first, like the way she moved things around in the house without asking, or how she'd frown when I reminded her to cover the food. I told myself it was nothing. Every new bride takes time to adjust. But then small things became big things. That morning, as I poured the tea, she walked in, wearing her usual expression of quiet annoyance. Her name was Rachel. Pretty, young, competent. My son loved her deeply, and I tried to love her too. I really did. "Good morning," I said softly. She didn't reply. She just looked around the kitchen, sighed, and said, "You really should label these jars. It's confusing." I nodded and smiled again. "I'll do that today." She didn't even look at me when she opened the fridge. I stood there holding the spoon, watching her take out milk, pour it into her coffee, and leave the kitchen without another word. And that's when I felt it. That quiet, heavy ache in the chest that mothers know too well. The feeling that your place in your own home is fading away. I remember going back to my room, sitting on the edge of the bed and whispering to myself, "It's okay. Maybe she's just having a bad day." But deep down, I knew this wasn't about a bad day. This was something deeper, something colder. You see, I raised my son alone. His father died when he was 10. From that day on, I made a promise to myself that I'd give my boy everything I could, every comfort, every bit of love I had left. We went through a lot together. Nights without electricity, days without proper meals, but we had each other. He used to say, "Mom, one day I'll buy you a house where you won't have to worry about anything." And he did. Except now I'm living in that same house and I feel like a guest. Sometimes when I look at him, I see that little boy who used to hold my hand in the market. The boy who cried when I was sick, who'd sleep beside me when thunder scared him. But now he's a man, and I can barely recognize him. Marriage changes people, that's what everyone says. But I never thought it would change the way he looks at me. I remember one evening, maybe a week before that horrible day, I was sitting in the living room watching old family videos. My son came in and saw me smiling at the screen. He said, "Look, you were only 5 here, remember this?" He smiled for a second, then Rachel walked in. His smile vanished. She looked at the screen and said, "Oh, again, with these old videos." I turned to her and said gently, "They bring back memories." She laughed softly, "Memories are fine, but maybe you should live in the present, Mom." Mom. The way she said it, polite but cold, like a word she didn't mean. I turned the video off. The room went quiet. My son shifted uncomfortably, then said, "Rachel's right, Mom. You should go out more. Maybe visit your sister." I nodded, pretending not to feel the sting in his voice. "I will," I said. "Maybe next week." But inside, I wondered, Why did he want me gone, even for a few days? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking, maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too old-fashioned, too attached. Maybe Rachel just needed her own space. I prayed quietly, asking God to give me patience and understanding. The next morning, I tried again. I cooked their favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with tomatoes, the way my son used to love it when he was a kid. When they came downstairs, I smiled and said, "Good morning, I made breakfast." Rachel looked at the table and frowned. Oh, we were planning to order something. My son didn't even look at me. He said, "Yeah, Mom, maybe next time, okay? You don't have to cook every morning." I forced a smile. "It's okay, I like cooking." But the way he said it, it felt like he didn't want my food, or maybe didn't want me there. After they left for work, I sat at the dining table staring at the plates. The food was getting cold. I remember whispering to myself, why does love fade when new people arrive? Why can't hearts make space instead of replacing? That afternoon, I went outside, sat in the garden, and looked at the roses. My husband had planted those before he died. Every year when they bloomed, it felt like he was saying hello again. But that day, I felt like even the flowers were silent. Then came the day I'll never forget. The day she humiliated me. It was Sunday. My son had invited a few of his colleagues and friends for lunch. Rachel was in charge of everything, the food, the decorations, the seating. I offered to help, but she said, "It's fine, I've got it." I still helped quietly, polishing the dishes, arranging the glasses, setting napkins. I froze. I could feel every eye on me, every breath in the room waiting for my response. I smiled, the same kind of smile that hides pain, and said softly, "I'm just happy to see everyone enjoying." But inside, I broke. When the guests left that evening, I quietly gathered the plates from the table. Everyone had laughed, talked, and eaten as if nothing had happened, but the echo of her words still rang inside me. My son had been sitting right there, beside her, and he said nothing. Not a single word to soften the moment, not even a glance toward me. After they all left, I went into the kitchen. The smell of food still hung in the air. Roasted chicken, lemon, garlic, the kind of smell that should make a home feel warm. But to me, it just felt heavy. I started washing the dishes slowly. The water was warm, and I kept telling myself to breathe. I could hear them laughing in the living room, Rachel and my son, talking about how well the lunch had gone. That sound used to make me happy once. Now it made me feel like I didn't belong there. While I washed the dishes, my mind drifted backward. Back to the days when that same boy would run into the kitchen, hungry after school, calling, "Mom, what's for dinner?" Back then, I never imagined a time would come when his voice would sound distant, like he was talking to someone else's mother. I remember those early years vividly. We lived in a small 2-room apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Life was simple, but love filled every corner. My husband, Ahmed, worked as a mechanic. He wasn't rich, but he was kind, the kind of man who never came home empty-handed, even if it was just a smile or a flower he picked from the roadside. When he passed away, the world changed. My son, Daniel, was 10. I still remember the day of the funeral, the way he held my hand so tight, afraid to let go. That night, when everyone left, he crawled into bed beside me and whispered, "Don't cry, Mom. I'll take care of you now." Those words became my strength. From that day on, everything I did, every extra hour of work, every sacrifice, was for him. I worked as a tailor, stitching clothes until my eyes ached, saving every dollar I could for his school fees. Sometimes we couldn't afford much, but Daniel never complained. He'd study under the flickering light of a cheap lamp and still smile at me before sleeping. He used to say, "One day, Mom, we'll have a house with a big kitchen just for you." And he made it happen. When he got his first job, he surprised me with a small but beautiful house. I cried that day, not because of the walls or the furniture,
but because I realized my little boy had kept his promise. For years, it was just us, mother and son, against the world. We had our little routines. Sunday mornings, we'd cook breakfast together. Friday nights, we'd watch old movies and eat popcorn. Sometimes he'd bring home fresh flowers and say, "Dad would have brought these for you." I believed nothing could ever come between us. Then, he met Rachel. I still remember the first time he brought her home. She walked in with a soft smile, wearing a pale blue dress. Her voice was sweet, polite. I liked her immediately. She called me Mrs. Ahmed at first, but after dinner, she said shyly, "Can I call you Mom?" I remember my heart swelling. I said, "Of course, dear. You're family now." For the first few months after their marriage, everything seemed fine. She'd help me in the kitchen, we'd talk about little things, recipes, flowers, her job. I truly thought I had gained a daughter. But slowly things changed. It started with little comments, "Oh, we don't cook like this at our house," or "You still use these old pots." Then came the rearranging. She'd move furniture, change curtains, paint the walls without asking. And Daniel, he just went along with it. I kept telling myself she was young and excited to make the house her own. So I stayed quiet. After all, a mother's duty is to keep peace. But silence, I've learned, sometimes teaches people that it's okay to hurt you. I began to notice how my son's tone changed. He became careful with his words, cautious, as if speaking to me might upset her. When I'd knock on their door to ask if they wanted tea, he'd say, "Mom, maybe text me next time, okay?" Text him. My own son, the same boy who used to shout for me across the street when he saw me after school. Sometimes I wondered if I had held on to him too tightly. Maybe I should have given him more space? But when you spend years being someone's entire world, it's hard to learn how to step aside. I remember calling my sister one night. She lives in another state. I told her, maybe I should move out for a while, give them their privacy. She said, "No, you're his mother. That's your home too." I wanted to believe her, but the truth was, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. Rachel started taking over everything, the bills, the shopping, even how my son celebrated my birthday. That year, instead of the usual family dinner, she said, "Let's go out to eat." I agreed, trying to be polite. At the restaurant, they ordered wine and talked about work. I sat there quietly, smiling, pretending to follow. No candles, no cake, no memory of the years gone by. Just polite laughter that didn't include me. When we got home, I went into my room and cried quietly. I didn't want them to hear, but I could feel something shifting inside me, like a piece of me was slowly fading away. Sometimes, when Daniel left for work, I'd sit in his room just to feel close to him again. The smell of his cologne, the photos from his college days, they made me feel like maybe I hadn't lost him completely. But then I'd hear Rachel's footsteps, and I'd rush out, afraid she'd think I was intruding. That's how I started living. Quietly, carefully, trying not to disturb their happiness.
And yet, I kept hoping things would change. Maybe she'd warm up to me. Maybe Daniel would notice my silence and ask what was wrong. But the days kept passing, and the distance grew wider. There was one morning that still stands out in my memory. I had woken up early and made breakfast for them. Pancakes and fruit. Rachel came downstairs, looked at the table, and said, "Oh, we're actually on a diet now." She looked at Daniel and said, "Right, honey?" He nodded quickly. "Yeah, Mom, we're avoiding carbs." I looked down at the pancakes and said softly, "I forgot. I'll make something else." Rachel laughed lightly. "It's okay, you can have them. You don't need to diet." I smiled. "Thank you." But the way she said it, it wasn't kindness. It was dismissal. That day, I started eating alone. Still, I never stopped caring. I ironed their clothes, watered the plants, kept the house clean. Not because I had to, but because that's what mothers do. They keep giving,
even when no one notices. Sometimes I'd see neighbors passing by and wave. They'd ask how I was doing, and I'd say, "I'm fine, just busy." I couldn't tell them the truth, that I was living in a house that once felt like home, but now felt like a waiting room. I remember praying every night, "God, give me strength to stay kind. Don't let bitterness take over." And somehow, I managed. Until that Sunday lunch, the day when everything broke. After everyone left and the silence filled the house, I sat in the kitchen, staring at the empty plates. The laughter from earlier still echoed faintly in my ears. My hands trembled slightly as I washed a glass. I wanted to ask Daniel, "Why didn't you say anything? Why did you just sit there?" But I didn't, because I knew what he'd say. He'd probably say, "Mom, she didn't mean it." And maybe he'd be right. Maybe she didn't mean it. But sometimes the things people say without meaning them hurt the most. I went to my room and opened my old photo album. There were pictures of Daniel as a child, his missing teeth smile, his school uniform, his first bicycle. I ran my fingers over the photos, tracing his little face. I whispered, "Where did you go, my boy? Where's the child who promised to take care of me?" The tears came slowly, silently, the kind that don't need sobs or sound, just a quiet ache that seeps through your bones. I lay down and stared at the ceiling. The light from the window made soft patterns on the wall. For the first time, I wondered what my life would be like if I just packed my things and left. Would they notice? Would he call me? Or would they just fill the empty room with something new? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing. The woman who smiled through pain at that lunch table was beginning to disappear. Something inside me was changing. Slowly, quietly. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just tired. The week after that lunch, the air inside the house felt different. It wasn't loud, not like the storms people imagine when families fight. No, it was quiet. That kind of silence that follows you from room to room, where even the sound of a spoon on a plate feels too loud. I tried to keep myself busy. I polished the shelves, watered the plants, ironed their clothes, even baked a cake that I left on the counter with a little note, "For my children." When I came back later that evening, the cake was half-eaten and the note was gone. I don't know why, but that empty counter broke my heart a little. Not because they ate without thanking me. I was happy they enjoyed it. But because the small note, the one where I wrote "my children," had vanished. Maybe it was thrown away. Maybe it just didn't mean anything. That night, Danny came home late. I was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch television. He looked tired, but I still smiled and asked, "Did you like the cake?" He glanced toward the kitchen and said, "Oh yeah, Rachel said it was good. Thanks, Mom." Then he walked upstairs. It should have been enough, those few words, but the way he said them, fast, distracted, made them sound like lines he had to get through. I turned the TV off. The house went dark except for the soft light from the staircase. I listened to their voices upstairs, faint laughter, then silence, then the click of a door closing. I remember whispering, "Good night, my son," even though he couldn't hear me. The next morning, Rachel came into the kitchen while I was folding napkins. She said, "Mom, can we talk?" Her voice was calm, careful. I nodded. "Of course." She hesitated. Then she said, "You've been doing a lot around the house, and I really appreciate it, but I think it would be better if you took some time for yourself. Maybe visit family, travel a bit." I looked at her for a moment, trying to understand. "Do you mean you want me to leave for a while?" She smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. She said, "Just for a few weeks. You deserve a break. Daniel and I need to adjust to marriage life, you know?" I could feel my throat tightening. "I understand," I said quietly. "I'll think about it." When she left the kitchen, I stood there staring at the counter, my hands trembling. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water and whispered, "She's right. They need space." That evening, I called my sister again. I said, "She wants me to visit you." My sister's voice softened. "Then come. My house is open." I smiled faintly. "Maybe next month. I'll see."
But deep down, I didn't want to leave. This house held too many memories. The smell of Daniel's childhood, the walls his father once painted, the tree outside the window that grew taller every year. A few days later, I noticed something new. Rachel started locking the pantry. At first, I thought it was an accident, but then I saw the new key ring hanging by the door. 2 keys, not 3. Mine was missing. When I asked Daniel about it, he said, "Oh, Rachel just wants to keep things organized. Don't take it personally." I smiled, but my chest felt heavy. Of course, organization is good. That night, I sat on my bed and looked around my room. It was tidy, small, and quiet. Too quiet. I realized I hadn't heard Daniel knock on my door in weeks. He used to do it every night before sleeping, even as an adult. Just a soft, "Good night, Mom." Now, only silence. One afternoon, I heard them arguing upstairs. Their voices were muffled but sharp. I didn't want to listen, but the walls were thin. Rachel said, "She doesn't give us space, Daniel. I feel like a guest in my own house." Daniel replied softly, "She's my mother, Rachel. Where should she go?" Rachel's voice cracked. "I'm not saying forever, but she's everywhere. She cooks, she cleans, she even folds our laundry." I stopped breathing for a moment. Those were the things I did out of love, the little ways I tried to stay useful. And now, they were the reasons I was being pushed away. I went outside to the garden, sat by the roses and closed my eyes. I told myself not to cry. Not again. The next morning, Daniel came to my door. "Mom," he said softly, "can we talk?" I nodded. "Always." He sat on the chair near the window. For a while, he said nothing. Then he sighed. "Rachel feels a little uncomfortable sometimes. She thinks you're too involved." I looked at him, forcing a smile. "Do you think so too?" He hesitated. "I think you just need some rest. You've done so much for us." That rest felt like another word for distance. I wanted to tell him how every sound in the house reminded him of you as a child, how every corner had a story, how I only stayed busy because the silence hurt. But I just said, "You're right. Maybe I do need rest." He smiled, relieved, as if a burden had lifted.
Then he kissed my forehead and left the room. When the door closed, I let the tears fall. Not the loud kind, just quiet tears that rolled down without permission. Days passed. I began staying in my room more often, pretending to nap when they were home. I thought maybe if I made myself invisible, peace would return. But one evening, Rachel came home upset. She had had a long day at work, and Daniel was late. I was in the kitchen warming soup. She turned in and said sharply, "Please don't cook tonight. I'm not hungry." I turned off the stove. "Of course." She sighed and sat down at the table. After a moment, she looked up. "You know, Mom, I'm trying. I really am. But it's hard living with someone who watches everything I do." Her voice was trembling now. "Sometimes I feel judged." I didn't know what to say. I never judged her. I stayed silent because I didn't want to say the wrong thing. Still, I said softly, "I'm sorry you feel that way. I never meant to make you uncomfortable." She nodded, but her eyes stayed cold. Maybe we just see things differently. Daniel came home shortly after. He noticed her mood, hugged her and asked, "Everything okay?" She said, "Just tired." Then she looked at me and smiled faintly, as if nothing had happened. I excused myself and went upstairs. From my window, I could see them sitting together on the couch, his arm around her shoulders. They looked happy, and I felt invisible. That night, I made a decision. I started packing a small suitcase. Just a few clothes, some photographs, my husband's old watch. If they needed space, I would give it to them. Maybe if I left, things would get better between them. The next morning, I went downstairs with the suitcase. Daniel was at the table, sipping coffee. He looked surprised. "Mom, what's this?" I smiled. "I'm going to visit my sister for a while." He frowned. "You don't have to do that." Rachel walked in, her tone too cheerful. "That's a great idea. You'll love it there." I felt my smile faded just a little. "It's only for a few days," I said. He hugged me, but it was quick. "Take care of yourself, Mom. Call me when you get there." I nodded and turned toward the door. But before leaving, I glanced back. Rachel was already setting the table for breakfast, humming softly. Daniel sat beside her, laughing. It looked like a picture from a magazine. Perfect, peaceful. I stepped outside, closed the door quietly behind me, and stood there for a moment. The air was crisp, the street calm. I wanted to believe this was the right thing to do. At my sister's house, the warmth felt different. She made tea, sat beside me, and said, "You look tired." I smiled weakly, just a little worn out. She held my hand and said, "Stay as long as you need." For a few days, I felt lighter. We cooked together, talked about childhood, laughed like we used to. But at night, when I laid down, my thoughts drifted back to Daniel. Did he miss me? Did he even notice the quiet house? One afternoon, I called him. Rachel answered. "Hi, Mom. Everything okay?" "Yes," I said. "Just wanted to hear Daniel's voice." "Oh, he's busy right now, maybe driving. I'll tell him you called." Her tone was polite, nothing more. I waited for him to call me back. He didn't.
Days turned into weeks. When I finally returned home, the house looked the same except cleaner, colder. Rachel smiled when she saw me. "Welcome back. Did you have a nice trip?" "Yes," I said quietly. "Where's Daniel?" "He's out with friends. He'll be back late." I went to my room and unpacked slowly. On my dresser, the family photo that used to sit in the living room was now lying face down. I picked it up, dusted it, and placed it upright again. Later that night, Daniel came home. He seemed surprised to see me. "Oh, you're back. How was the trip?" "It was fine," I said. "I missed you." He smiled briefly, then checked his phone. "Glad you're back, Mom." That was it. No warmth, no stories, just polite words. The next morning, Rachel asked, "Would you mind if we repainted your room? We're thinking of changing the decor a little." I said, "If it makes you happy." She smiled. "Thanks, Mom." I realized then that every mom she spoke was a formality, not affection. That week, she invited her parents to stay for a few days. They were kind people, polite, but their presence made me feel smaller somehow, like a shadow in the background. When they sat at the dining table, I often took my meal in my room. On the last day of their visit, her mother said kindly, "You have a lovely home." Rachel smiled and said, "Thank you, Mom. We've worked hard for it." For it, not we all, just we. I excused myself quietly, went outside, and stood by the rose bush. The petals were falling, red against the grass. I whispered to my husband's memory, "I kept my promise. I raised him well. I just didn't know love could fade this way." That evening, Daniel came to me again. "Mom, can we talk?" I nodded. He sighed. "Rachel feels like you don't like her." My voice was calm. "I've never said a word against her." "I know," he said, "but maybe it's the way things feel. Maybe you two just need space." I looked at him and said softly, "How much space does love need before it disappears?" He didn't answer. That night I sat awake for hours, the clock ticked softly, the house silent. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the wind brushing against the windows. And that's when I realized this quiet was no longer peace. It was distance. I didn't know then that the real humiliation was still to come. That one single afternoon, a few careless words would change everything forever. I still remember that morning clearly. The day everything finally broke. The sun was out, soft and golden, but the house felt cold. There was a silence that didn't belong there, the kind that made you feel like something bad was about to happen. I had woken up early as always. Old habits don't change easily. I made breakfast not for myself, but for everyone else. Paratha, eggs, tea. I knew Ethan liked his tea strong and Lily preferred hers light. I placed everything on the table carefully. It was my way of saying, I still care. But when Lily came out of her room, she didn't even glance at the food. She just looked at me, then at the table, then back at me. "Mom," she called me that in her usual polite way, "you don't have to do this anymore." Her voice wasn't angry, just distant, but I could hear the meaning behind it. I smiled, pretending not to notice. "It's okay, dear. I like doing it. I've been making breakfast my whole life." She sighed. "Yes, but this is our home now. I'd like to keep it simple. You don't have to wake up early and cook for us." I nodded, forcing a soft smile. "Of course, I understand." Ethan entered a few minutes later. He noticed the tension. I could see it in his eyes. He tried to lighten the mood by saying, "Wow, Mom, breakfast looks amazing," and reached for a paratha. But Lily's glance stopped him. She said quietly, "Honey, remember what we talked about?" He froze, then put the plate back. "Right," he murmured, "I remember." And that was it. No one ate what I had made. I sat down slowly, pretending to read something on my phone, just so I wouldn't cry. That was the moment I realized I didn't belong at their table anymore. Over the next few days, Lily became more vocal about what she called boundaries. She told me not to do the laundry because she liked to organize things her way. She said she preferred handling the grocery list herself because I bought old-fashioned brands. Every time she said something like that, I told myself she wasn't wrong. Maybe I was old-fashioned. Maybe my ways didn't fit into their modern life.
I kept making excuses for her because I didn't want to believe she disliked me. But little things add up, like raindrops before a storm. One afternoon, she invited her friends over. I helped her set up the living room, arranged the cushions, brought out snacks, poured drinks. She didn't stop me that time. I thought maybe things were getting better. But when her friends arrived, one of them asked, "Oh, Lily, is that your maid?" Everyone laughed softly like it was a harmless joke. Lily smiled awkwardly and said, "No, that's my mother-in-law. She just loves helping out." She didn't correct them with warmth or pride, just a polite, cold explanation. My heart sank a little, but I smiled anyway and said, "It's okay, dear. I don't mind." That evening, I went to my room early. I sat on the bed holding an old photograph of Ethan when he was little, with messy hair and ice cream on his face. I whispered to the picture, "You used to need me. You used to look at me like I was your whole world." Tears came without warning. I didn't make a sound. I just let them fall quietly on my lap. A week later came the day that would change everything, the day of humiliation I'll never forget. Lily had organized a small family dinner. Ethan's friends, her parents, and a few neighbors were invited. She wanted everything to be perfect. I spent the whole day helping. Cooking, setting the table, polishing glasses, folding napkins. I thought maybe for one night we could all sit together and laugh again like a real family. As the guests arrived, I felt proud of how everything looked. The aroma of food filled the house. Everyone was smiling and complimenting Lily. But then during dinner, someone spilled a drink, a small glass of red wine that tipped over on Lily's white tablecloth. Without thinking, I rushed to clean it up. I grabbed a towel and started wiping it gently. Lily froze. Her voice turned sharp, the kind of tone that slices through laughter.
"Please, just stop," she said, standing up. "You don't have to touch everything." The whole room went silent. Everyone turned to look at me. "I was just trying to help," I said softly. "I know, but this isn't your kitchen," she said loudly. You always act like it's your home, but it's not. You're a guest here. Please, just sit down." Her words hit harder than I expected. "You're a guest here." I looked at Ethan. I wanted him to say something, anything. I wanted him to tell her that I was his mother, that this was my home too. But he didn't. He just stared down at his plate, pretending not to hear. For a moment, everything around me blurred. The faces, the lights, the sounds. My chest felt heavy. My hands started trembling, and I slowly placed the towel down. I forced a smile. "You're right," I whispered. "I should sit down." But my legs didn't want to move. I felt frozen, embarrassed, exposed. I looked around at all those faces. Some of them looked sorry for me. Others just looked away. I slowly walked to my room. No one followed. No one said a word. Inside, I closed the door and sat on the bed. The laughter outside returned after a few minutes, faint but clear. I could hear Lily's cheerful voice again, as if nothing had happened. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "This is what it feels like to disappear in your own home." Later that night, after everyone left, I sat by the window watching the rain. Ethan came in quietly. He didn't look at me right away. He just stood by the door. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm sorry about earlier. She didn't mean it like that." I turned to him slowly. "Didn't she? She said I'm just a guest." He sighed. "It's complicated. She's under a lot of stress." I shook my head. "No, Ethan, it's simple. I raised you to stand up for what's right. You saw me being humiliated, and you said nothing. That's not stress. That's silence." He didn't respond, just lowered his head. "I don't want to fight," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't want to make things worse for you. But do you know what hurt me the most? It wasn't her words. It was your silence." He finally looked at me then, his eyes red, his mouth trembling. "I didn't know what to do, Mom." I said, "You could have looked at me, just looked at me and said, 'I'm with you.' That would have been enough." Tears filled his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I nodded, trying to smile through my own tears. "I know you are." He left quietly, closing the door behind him. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the rain fading away. The next morning, I woke up before dawn and started packing a few of my things. Not everything, just enough to leave quietly. A few clothes, my medications, a family photograph, and the little handmade card Ethan gave me when he was 7 that said, "You are my sunshine." When I zipped the bag, it felt heavier than it should. Before leaving, I went to the living room. The tablecloth from last night was still there, the wine stain faint but visible. I placed a note next to it. It said, "Thank you for letting me stay. I'll always love you both. Please take care of each other." Then I walked to the front door. My hands were shaking, but my heart felt strangely calm. I wasn't angry anymore, just empty. When I stepped outside, the morning air hit my face, cool and quiet. For the first time in a long while, I felt free and completely alone. I didn't know where I was going. I just started walking. Every step away from that house felt like letting go of a piece of my old life. The street outside was still wet from the night's rain. I stood there for a long moment, the small bag in my hand, and the morning air pressing gently against my face. The sky was pale gray. The world was quiet. No one knew I was leaving, not even Ethan. I didn't want another conversation that would end with tears and silence. I just needed space to breathe. I started walking toward the bus stop at the end of the road. Every step felt heavier than the one before. The houses looked peaceful, families waking up, curtains opening, the smell of breakfast in the air. And there I was, an old woman with a bag, walking away from the people I loved most. When the bus arrived, I sat near the window. Raindrops slid across the glass like tiny stories of their own. I watched the city pass by, shops opening, children rushing to school, people with coffee cups in their hands. Life was moving on, even though mine felt paused. I didn't have a plan. I just told myself I would go to my sister's house, 2 towns away. We hadn't spoken much in years, not because of anger, just distance and time. As the bus rolled through the countryside, I thought about calling her, but decided against it. I wanted to show up quietly, without warning, like a ghost from the past. When she opened the door with a look of shock that turned instantly into warmth, "Good Lord, what are you doing here?" she asked, pulling me into a hug before I could even answer. I smiled weakly. Just needed a place to rest for a while. She didn't ask questions right away. She made me tea, the kind with a little too much sugar, and we sat in silence. After a few minutes, she said softly, "Something happened, didn't it?" I nodded. "I think I've outstayed my welcome at Ethan's house." She eyes softened. "Oh, sweetheart." She reached across the table and took my hand. "You've always given everything for that boy." I thought I was helping. I just wanted to feel useful. She squeezed my fingers gently. "You are useful.
You always have been. But sometimes people don't see it until it's too late. Her words stayed with me that night. I lay on her couch, listening to the sound of rain tapping the window again. For the first time in a long while, I slept deeply. Not because I was happy, but because I was exhausted from pretending to be strong.
Days turned into weeks. I began to find a rhythm in my sister's house. I helped her water the plants, cooked simple meals, and took long walks in the small park nearby. The air there smelled different, cleaner, lighter somehow. Children played on swings, old couples fed pigeons, and life moved at a slower, kinder pace. Sometimes I sat on a bench with a book I barely read, thinking about Ethan and Lily. I wondered what they were doing, whether they noticed I was gone. Part of me hoped they missed me. Another part whispered, maybe they feel relieved. One afternoon, I took out my phone and stared at Ethan's number for nearly 10 minutes. My thumb hovered over the call button, but I couldn't press it. I didn't know what I would say. How do you speak to your child after leaving without goodbye? So I wrote a message instead. Hi, Ethan. I'm staying with Aunt May for a while. I'm fine. Don't worry. Take care of Lily. I didn't mention the dinner or the words or the silence. Just a plain, quiet message. He replied an hour later. Mom, are you okay? Please call me. I've been worried. I didn't call that night. I needed more time to find my balance, to remember who I was outside of being someone's mother-in-law, outside of being someone's mother. The next few weeks were gentle. I spent time with my sister's grandchildren. They called me Grandma Ann and filled the house with noise and laughter. Their innocence healed parts of me I didn't know were broken. Every hug felt like a bandage. Every laugh reminded me that love can start over, even in small ways. One evening, as the sun was setting and the kitchen smelled like baked apples, my sister said, You should talk to him, Anne. You can't live with that silence forever. I sighed. I don't know if I'm ready. She said, You don't have to forgive everything today. Just start by hearing his voice. So I called. When Ethan picked up, there was a pause, long and heavy. Then I heard his breath, shaky and soft. Mom? Hi, sweetheart. Where are you? I tried coming by, but you weren't home. I've been so worried. I'm with Aunt May, I said gently. I just needed a little space. He was quiet for a while. Then in a small voice he said, I'm sorry, Mom. I should have stood up for you. I froze that night, and I hate myself for it. My throat tightened. Ethan, you don't have to hate yourself. We all make mistakes when we're scared. I just wish you had looked at me. I know, he said, and I'll never forget that moment. Lily feels terrible too. She's been crying ever since you left. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to ask, why now? But another part just wanted to keep listening. She asked me to tell you she's sorry, he continued. She said she let her pride get in the way. She wants to see you, if you'll let her. I closed my eyes, feeling the sting of tears again. I don't know, Ethan. I need time. That's okay, he said quickly. I understand. I love you, Mom. More than I ever said. His voice cracked at the end, and that was all it took. Tears rolled down my cheeks silently. I love you too, I whispered. We didn't talk much after that. Just sat there, breathing, the line open between us like a quiet bridge. After the call, I sat by the window, watching the moon rise over the hills. The night was peaceful, and for the first time, my heart didn't ache with anger. It ached with acceptance. Maybe love doesn't always mean staying under the same roof. Sometimes love means letting go until everyone learns how to hold it again. My sister came in quietly and handed me a cup of warm milk. You talked to him? She asked. Yes,
I said. Feel better? Lighter, I said softly. Not better, but lighter. She smiled knowingly. That's how healing begins. The next few days passed slowly, but peacefully. I stayed mostly at my sister's house, walking through the quiet streets, listening to birds, and letting the rhythm of life calm my heart. Each day I felt a little lighter, a little more like myself. I started cooking small meals for the children again, and their laughter was like medicine I didn't know I needed. One morning, as the sun spilled golden light through the windows, I received a call from Ethan. His voice was gentle, patient, almost hesitant. Mom, we're coming to pick you up, if you're ready. I paused. My fingers tightened around the phone. I had imagined this moment countless times, the meeting, the apology, the awkward hugs. But now, hearing his voice, I realized how much I had missed him, how much I had missed us. I'm ready, I whispered, my voice barely audible, but enough for him to hear. When we drove up to the house, my heart pounded in my chest. The familiar brick walls, the garden, the windows where I had spent so many quiet evenings, everything looked unchanged, yet everything felt different. I carried my small bag and stepped out of the car slowly. Lily was waiting at the door. She looked nervous, almost fragile. Her usual confidence was softened, her posture a little unsure. When she saw me, her eyes widened, and for a moment, she didn't speak. I walked toward her. "Hello, Lily," I said softly. "Hi, Mom?" she replied, her voice trembling just a little. There was silence. Then she took a small step closer, and I realized she was holding her hand out slightly, unsure if I would take it. I smiled and held her hand gently.
"I'm sorry," she whispered. I shook my head. "No, Lily, you were learning. Everyone needs to learn. I understand now." Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded quickly, as if trying to hide them. I didn't mean to make you feel unwelcome. I got carried away with everything." "I know," I said. "I saw it wasn't about me. It was about finding your own space in this house, and that's okay. I just needed to step back for a while to see it too." Her shoulders relaxed, and she took a small step closer. "I want you to come back, if you'll let me." "I'd like that," I whispered, smiling through the tears. When I entered the house again, it felt like stepping into another world. The walls smelled the same, the furniture in the same place, yet something felt different, lighter. The tension that had hung over the home for months had softened. I unpacked my bag slowly, taking my time just as I had when I first moved in so many years ago. That evening, we sat together for dinner. It was quiet at first, as though we were all testing the waters, afraid to break the fragile peace. Then Ethan smiled, reaching across the table. "Mom," he said gently, "thank you for coming back." I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "Thank you for waiting for me to come back." Lily placed her hand over mine. "We've learned a lot, Mom, about each other, about love, about patience. We'll do better, I promise." "I believe you," I said, my voice soft but steady. We ate together, slowly, carefully. I watched Ethan and Lily interact, the laughter, the quiet understanding, the small gestures that said more than words ever could. I realized then that love doesn't always look like constant closeness or endless attention. Sometimes love is patient. Sometimes it waits in silence. In the days that followed, we slowly rebuilt our home. I stopped overstepping, but I stayed close enough to be part of their lives. I learned to let Lily handle the kitchen, the laundry, the grocery shopping, while I quietly helped in small ways only when asked. It wasn't easy at first.
Old habits die slowly, but every small compromise made the house feel more like a shared space rather than a battlefield. One evening, as we sat on the couch together, Ethan handed me a small envelope. He said, "For you." Inside was a note, handwritten in his careful, grown-up handwriting. It read, "Mom, I'm sorry for the times I didn't stand by you. I promise to always remember that your love is steady, patient, and endless. Thank you for never giving up on me." I clutched the note to my chest and held it close, feeling the weight of his words. I didn't need to reply. The note said everything I wanted to hear. A few days later, I found myself alone in the garden. The roses had bloomed again, red and vibrant. I ran my fingers over the petals and thought about the months that had passed, the humiliation, the tears, the distance. And then I realized something. Love had not disappeared. It had simply been buried beneath misunderstandings, unspoken words, and fear. Now it was growing again, quietly, patiently, in its own way. I thought about the lessons I had learned. I had learned that stepping back doesn't mean giving up. I had learned that silence can be both painful and healing. And most importantly, I had learned that love is never wasted, even when it feels unappreciated. That evening, we all sat together again, Ethan, Lily, and I. No one was pretending. No one was holding back. We laughed, shared stories, and ate together. For the first time in months, I felt truly at home. Not because I was needed, but because I was loved. I still remember that night before I went to bed. I sat by my window, the moon casting a soft glow over the house. I whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. Thank you for teaching me patience. Thank you for showing me that love is stronger than hurt. And thank you for letting me return to the people I love most. I knew life wouldn't always be easy. Misunderstandings would come again. There would be moments of tension, moments where words would fail us. But now I also knew that love could heal. It could survive silence, distance, even humiliation. I closed my eyes and felt peace settle over me. My heart was lighter, my spirit stronger. I had learned the most important lesson of all. Forgiveness and understanding are not signs of weakness. They are the strongest forms of love. And as I drifted off to sleep, I knew that tomorrow the sun would rise, the roses would bloom, and the home I feared I'd lost would continue to hold all of us together, imperfectly, but with love intact.